Good morning. Today is July 9th, 2024. I'm Shannon Gudgel, and I'm here with Mark Denny, who's reporting. And I'm going to read basically it's the history of Neil's supposed criminal activity and the injustices done to him by specifically the Alliance Police Department, surrounding counties in the state of Ohio. So, the Bill Gates of marijuana cultivation. That is a quote from an episode of Unsolved Mysteries where Neil Gott was the unwilling star. It's no secret in Ohio of the long-time relationship between the Alliance Police Department, Stark County, and Neil Gott. Years of harassment of Mr. Gott from this department has left a trail of destruction, including a charge of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, false imprisonment, unlawful search and seizure, ridiculously high bonds, a Speedy Trial Act violation, tampering with evidence, blatant lies, and affidavits for search warrants, and the list goes on and on. Not only has this 50-year span of harassment affected Neil Gott mentally, but has caused the loss of family, friends, and most importantly, his ability to earn a living in the trucking industry that he so loved. According to Detective Joseph Wire of the Alliance Police Department, Neil Gott has been the subject of federal and state arrests and convictions since 1972, including sale of hallucinogens, keeper of a house where hallucinogens are kept or stored, trafficking in cocaine, trafficking in marijuana, and possession of drugs, and conspiracy to possess with the intent to distribute drugs. As stated above, Neil's history with the Alliance Police Department spans back to 1972 when a friend of his asked him to hold on to some of his belongings, which included 2 doses of LSD. When the friend returned to retrieve his belongings, he brought with him a narcotics agent. Neil was arrested for the 2 doses of LSD and was booked and released. Neil recovers from this incident, leased a farm, and maintained a job as a commercial rock quarry blaster until again, Stark County saw an opportunity to harass Neil Gott in 1974. Neil had invited a homeless Vietnam veteran to occupy an extra downstairs room until he could get back on his feet. This veteran possessed 2 ounces of marijuana in his belongings locked in his private room. A confidential informant named Tim John informed Stark County not only of the 2 ounces but also lied to authorities by claiming that they were growing marijuana in the fields. After 3 days of aerial surveillance looking for the marijuana, none was found. Not wanting to leave empty-handed, Stark County deputies raided Mr. Gott's house and found the 2 ounces of marijuana in the veteran's bedroom after kicking in the locked door. Neil and 2 others were arrested for possession, which violates the mere presence rule, which states that being present at the scene of a crime does not constitute sufficient evidence to warrant an arrest. There must be additional evidence linking the individual to the criminal activity. After the jury was unable to agree on the verdict, Judge Morris ordered a directed verdict, which meant he would not accept any other verdict except guilty. So, needless to say, Neil was charged as a keeper of a drug house and sentenced to 2 to 5 years, which he did 2 years of until he won his appeal and the charge was reversed. Knowing the harassment from Ohio authorities would not cease, Neil took a trip to Florida to regroup in 1976, then vacationed overseas. In shock, Neil found out from a relative that he was being accused of violating parole, even though he was adjudicated in court. Obviously, there was a lack of communication between authorities in Ohio, which could have potentially caused Neil more unwarranted trouble. This early incident was just the beginning of a long history of harassment bestowed upon Neil Gott. Upon returning to Ohio from his travels, Neil started a coin-bending business, owned a dry dock marine service, raced boats, got married, and had just become a father to a little girl in 1989. He was trying to live as much of a normal life as possible, even though he was aware of constantly being monitored by the FBI. His fears came to fruition when in 1990, Neil stopped by to visit an old friend in Summit County, who was also being monitored by the FBI, and exchanged phone numbers. Under pressure from the FBI, Neil's friend agreed to have his phone monitored by a PIN register. This friend later called Neil's residence and spoke to his wife, Terry, who stated that she would tell Neil to call him. A week later, Neil returned his friend's phone call and made plans to come by his friend's residence for a visit. Because of Neil's relationship with this friend, this phone call was monitored as a drug-related conversation and sparked the authorities to tap Neil's phone, which yielded no evidence or conversations of drug-related activity. While visiting his friend, the Summit County authorities raided the property, including Neil's vehicle that was parked on the street. 2 ounces of cocaine was allegedly found in Neil's truck and was confiscated by officers. There was no arrest. Neal's lawyer was then contacted by the FBI and told that Neal needed to come in and talk to them, but Neal's lawyer advised him to lay low and let me work on this. Contact me in a month. On his lawyer's directive, Neal and family went back to Florida. Neal followed up with his lawyer a month later as directed and was informed that, "You're in a lot of trouble. Give me another month to work on this. Call me in another month." With no new updates from Neal's attorney or the authorities, Neal felt safe making a permanent life for himself in Florida, starting in Miami, where he continued working in the dry dock and marine services, then relocating to North Brevard and Volusia counties in 1991, where he and a friend started growing marijuana hydroponically. For the next 5 years, he remained in Volusia County and ultimately purchased 5 acres on a lake in Lake County. Neal transformed this property into an impressive indoor hydroponics grow facility, utilizing a 40 by 80 building and burying a 40-foot semi-trailer in the ground to utilize as a power plant for his 100-kilowatt diesel generator. In October of 1995, federal agents descended onto Neal Gott's property and arrested him for being a fugitive and cultivation of marijuana. When the case went to court, federal Judge Black dismissed the unlawful flight charges because they were filed after Neal moved to Florida. He also dismissed the recent charges from the raid because the amount of marijuana seized was under the probational amount for a nonviolent crime. While in custody in Florida, the FBI retrieved Neal and returned him to Ohio to face the cocaine conspiracy charges from his friendship with DiPolito. Now back in Ohio, facing a federal charge, along with his wife, a conspiracy to distribute cocaine, Neal was incarcerated in the Lucas County Jail for nearly 1.5 years. Not only was Neal incarcerated, but so was his wife Terry, leaving their young daughter in foster care. Neal was then transferred to the Milan Federal Facility in Michigan, where he resided until April 1997. Ohio just completed a new federal facility closer to Neal's mother and family. In order for Neal to move closer to home, he pleaded to the charge of conspiracy and was given the sentence of 6 years in Elkton Federal Prison. After incarceration for 1 year in the Elkton facility, Neal opted to join the drug rehabilitation program and was transferred to Lexington, Kentucky in 1998. Due to good behavior and completing the drug program, Neal was released from prison after serving a total of 4 years and moved to a halfway house in Youngstown, Ohio, where he started attending truck driving school. After graduating from truck driving school, Neal continued to make his living driving semi-trucks. With his successful career in truck driving, Neal was able to purchase his own semi, obtain his own carrier numbers in 2001, started his own company, and eventually acquired a fleet of semis which provided him with a $6,000 per week income, which he used to invest back into the company. But, as in the past, in 2003, authorities were constantly watching and monitoring Neal's every move. Even though he was operating a legitimate business, the authorities could not stop harassing him. This harassment led to the Alliance Police Department yet again arresting Neal before any search was done for allegedly growing marijuana in a maintenance garage on a tip triggered from a jealous man who mistakenly assumed Neal was having a relationship with a woman he liked. Neal was a truck driver on the road for weeks at a time, which made it impossible for him to maintain any type of agricultural activities. After the arrest, authorities searched for the marijuana grow through thermoimaging and claimed they found heat off grow lights, which ended up being the heat off a pilot light on the hot water heater. A physical search of the property yielded no plants and no indication of growing activity. Yet, they kept him incarcerated over 90 days, claiming there must have been a marijuana grow there, and Neal must have moved it, even though no evidence was found. They filed 7 unjustified accounts against Neal, but 5 were thrown out on the first hearing due to lack of evidence, but 2 remained, even though there was still no evidence. Meanwhile, they continued to hold Neal in the county jail on a ridiculously high bond of $500,000 cash. Neal entered an Alfred plea to get out so he could raise money to fight the charges. His lawyer told him not to go to trial because of the corruptness of the system. Neal's request for the Alfred plea was granted in the municipal court, but was rescinded in the appeals court due to the prosecution's false statements about fleeing, which Neal was never charged with, and stating he was on America's Most Wanted, which he was not. Neal was then sentenced to 1 year for growing marijuana and served the full year. While sitting in jail, Neal was unable to obtain any income for his future. Neal was released from jail in 2004 and started driving trucks again to recover his lost income. In 2005, a federal judge asked to speak to Neal. He acknowledged the injustices done to Neal and subsequently released him from fulfilling his remaining years on federal parole. But Neal was not going to fight for his rights, so he continued to drive his semi, making money in order to hire another attorney since his longtime attorney had passed away. From 2005 to 2009, Neal concentrated on expanding his trucking company with more semis. His incarceration robbed him of any income, and hence he was behind on child support and many other expenses, and stayed on the road continuously for weeks at a time, making money to catch up on all his debts. By now, Neal was operating a thriving trucking company, profiting $300,000 per year. He was finally feeling positive about his future when along came the Alliance Police Department yet again in 2009. Neal's accountant at the time, who was an accountant for many trucking companies, was arrested along with her daughter for selling marijuana and made false accusations about Neal, later recanted, in order to plea out of criminal charges. She was linked to Neal when authorities found his accounting paperwork, files, logbooks, insurance cards, cab cards, office equipment, and more on her table during a search of her property. Without these important trucking papers for all 4 semi-trucks, a trucking company cannot operate as per the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Acting upon this connection, Alliance Police saw an opportunity to focus their attention on Neal and his activities yet again. They proceeded to raid the garage where Neal's car where Neal they proceeded to raid the garage where Neal's car was with important legal papers in the trunk. They proceeded to raid the car where Neal's car with important legal papers in the trunk was being stored by blowing the doors off with explosives. Confiscated the car illegally after a search warrant, and ultimately again found no evidence of illegal activity. Feeling discouraged, the Alliance Police Department went on a rampage to figure out a way to nail Neal by any means possible. They found their opportunity when alerted by the bookkeeper that one of Neal's trucks were carrying contraband. The authorities pulled over Neal's driver and passenger on their route to deliver tools and equipment to Cincinnati. Without a search warrant, authorities detained the occupants, one actually being handcuffed to the guardrail during a diabetic episode, and proceeded to search and seize the semi, again finding no drug activity, then having it towed to their facility. Still without a search warrant in hand, the authorities destroyed the semi-cab looking for evidence which was never found. They also had a command to return the semi-truck and trailer within 72 hours, which was violated. To this day, Neal has not received his property back. The next day, 2 of Neal's friends' houses were raided, and still, no illegal activity found and no charges were filed. Yet, when Neal went to retrieve his car, semi-truck, and trailer, the authorities refused to release them, violating the 72-hour command and return order on the search warrant. After these recent activities and loss of yet another vehicle that supplied Neal an income, he had had enough with the state of Ohio and its corruption. Neal folded his business, took what belongings he had, and left and moved to Colorado. That's it. I have.
That sound about right?
Yeah, it's all right. We even got the dates and the times right because we went back through and pulled the actual folders out. I still didn't find that one that you wanted where my arrest times and dates, for like 03. There's this much shit. Line after line after line after line. And each one of those lines is $25, $30, $190 to the court. You got to pay all that. They lodge all that against you.
So
Yeah, leave that right there.
So right now, what I'd like to do is start on.
My time in Colorado
No,
and how I had to
no, we're not doing that yet.
What is today's date?
10.
Oh, that was 9th. Sorry.
July 10th. Okay.
Sorry.
July 10th.
I could be wrong.
2024.